Next items are related to the calendar. You'll have an opportunity to review the proposed calendar for school year 26-27, as well as a proposed minor adjustment to the 2025-26 calendar, which this board had previously approved, and you'll see a recommended adjustment there. And so I'll turn it over to Mrs. Coy for those presentations.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. This afternoon, I'm pleased to bring a presentation about the development of the 26-27 calendar for your initial review and consideration. At the end, as Dr. Cashwell mentioned, I will also provide a recommendation for a minor adjustment to the 25-26 calendar based on the feedback gathered this year. The development of the proposed calendar is a collaborative effort that includes a wide variety of stakeholders and a great deal of input. Our HCPS calendar committee began meeting last fall to initiate conversations on the 26-27 calendar, shape the community survey, and develop recommendations for your consideration here today. This year, we also engaged some of our advisory committees in new ways to gather their feedback. So we are incredibly grateful to the teachers, principals, parents, and students who have weighed in via any number of different mechanisms to help inform your decisions. So this year we engaged our student advisory and our teacher advisory committees on this topic in some new ways. And this arose out of an initial conversation we had with our teacher advisory committee about their most precious commodity, time. So in the fall, we provided both committees with blank calendars, some general parameters, and set them free to get creative in drafting instructional calendars from scratch. They generated a lot of different ideas, and they even engaged in some tough negotiations as they sought to reach consensus with their peers. While the ideas were varied, the strongest themes from our teachers were the need for more clerical time and the need for professional learning to occur earlier in the school year. Meanwhile, our students were nearly unanimous in their strong support of a staggered start, and they had many vigorous debates about the length of various breaks throughout the year. The conversations this year, I should also note, were very iterative. So TAC principals and students gave the calendar committee a preliminary round of ideas, and the calendar committee then translated all of that into a couple concrete proposals, which went back out to those groups so they could weigh in on their preferences about how the calendar committee had proposed applying their different ideas. I think it's fair to say that these groups now have a new appreciation for the difficult decisions and compromises that go into creating school calendars. Additionally, as we do every year, this year we administered an online survey to ensure that our community members also had an opportunity to weigh in. The survey helps affirm some of our ongoing practices and flag others that are no longer serving us well. This was the third year in which we requested feedback around a staggered start for our pre-K, kindergarten, 6th, and 9th grade students. New to the survey this year, we asked the community about their preferences when given a couple different options for the addition of a full clerical day for staff, based on that feedback you just heard about. A comprehensive report with survey results is available in board docs, and we'll cover a few of the highlights here. So you may recall that the calendar committee has been contemplating a staggered start over the last few years. And last year, they developed a unique HCPS proposal after hearing directly from some of our neighbors about their staggered starts. Generally speaking, a staggered start can take different forms, but the idea is that a division brings back some transitional grades on the first day of school and then phases in remaining grades on other days that week. In the HCPS proposal discussed last year and again this year, pre-K and kindergarten students would start either Monday or Tuesday, as noted here, with roughly half of each grade starting each day. Students would remain home on the alternate day. This allows those classes to acclimate to a new teacher, building, and routines in a smaller, more personal group. All other elementary students would start on Monday as usual. At the secondary level, 6th and 9th grade students would start on Monday, and all other students would start on Tuesday. There are a number of reasons that some divisions have adopted this type of approach and why the calendar committee has continued to consider it. The model aims to facilitate a smooth transition for students in key grades who are entering a new building by providing those small class settings, like with our pre-K and K students, and an entire transitional day for 6th and 9th graders to adjust as an entire cohort. The goal is that this type of start to the year will foster a strong sense of belonging and school connectedness between students and staff. It also helps ensure everyone starts the year with the same set of expectations. It offers a comprehensive and equitable orientation experience with transportation provided to all students as usual and the opportunity for all secondary students to walk their entire schedules that first day. As those are contract days for all staff, everyone would still report on those days, regardless of the grade or course that they may teach. If they don't have students in their classroom, they may be assisting with other activities in the building or preparing for student arrival the following day. Here, you can see how our questions to the community have evolved about the staggered start and how support has grown over the last few years. This year, we saw the strongest support yet from the community and a drop in the number of those who did not support it. These are the results of this year's survey by respondent type when asked about their level of support for the staggered start, as I just described it, that HCPS proposal. So overall, we see about 65% support for the model, and we continue to see students rank it very highly, as they did in our student advisory committee. This year, we also asked survey takers to share a bit about how easy or difficult it would be for their family to adjust schedules to accommodate the staggered start, and found that overall, most said it would be very or moderately easy to adjust to. Based on the continued discussion of and support for this model, it has been included in the recommendation before you today from the calendar committee. As I noted previously, staff were very clear in our discussions this fall that additional clerical time was a high priority for their calendar considerations. Based on that, the committee developed 3 potential options for adding a full clerical day to the calendar. Their recommendation was also informed by a general consensus that more half-days would not be fruitful for teachers or for students. That's why they considered a full day. So the 3 options they developed were: 1, adding a full clerical day on election day and moving the professional learning typically done on that day earlier in September. That day in September would become a new holiday for students. The second option was adding a full clerical day on the first day back from winter break. And the third option was adding a full clerical day in between the first and second semesters at the end of January. We then took those options back to the community and to our various advisory committees. As you will see in the next few slides, the results really varied. Families indicated January 4th as their preference, but staff prioritized the day in between semesters 1 and 2. But as we unpack staff answers, there is variation by role. So generally speaking, our teachers on TAC preferred the day returning from winter break. It was a close call, but our elementary principals preferred the first day back from winter break, but that day between the two semesters was a close second. Our secondary principals were flipped with the day between semesters as the preference, but the first day back from winter break coming in as a close second. So generally speaking, the 2 options were far preferred over the fall options, with some variations between the 2. The calendar committee debated these 2 options at length, and ultimately the recommendation they made is to place an in-person clerical day in between the 2 semesters that would fall on January 25th, and it would eliminate the half day that typically falls at the end of the second semester. This year, we also asked our community about their preferences for Thanksgiving break, in part due to a recent change made by Hanover County Public Schools to provide an entire week off at Thanksgiving. As you might imagine, this was a topic hotly debated by our Student Advisory Committee. But in the end, our community was overwhelmingly clear in their support for our current model, where we have school Monday and Tuesday and the remainder of the week off. Therefore, no change to our current practice is recommended at this time. The final recommendations for your consideration are reflected in a draft calendar that is attached in Board Talks. I also have a summary slide for you. So the major changes being proposed include the implementation of a staggered start, moving professional learning earlier in the year, and adding a full in-person clerical day. We recommend maintaining our current structure for Thanksgiving break and our diverse religious holidays, which were affirmed by our stakeholders throughout the process and in the survey. So finally, based on all the feedback we gathered this year, we also started contemplating how it might be applied for the 25-26 calendar, which you all approved last spring and is also attached in Board Docs. So the two pieces of feedback driving these changes are, one, the request that the professional learning we offer occur earlier in the year, and the request for more clerical time to be built into the year. So as you heard, we built that into our considerations for 26-27, but then went looking for these opportunities to build it in for next year. In Board Docs, there are two versions of the 25-26, the one that you all approved last spring and one that reflects these proposed changes. So the proposal adds clerical time to the calendar by converting our current election day professional learning day into a flexible clerical day for staff. It then adds a professional learning day on September 22nd. So September 22nd would become one additional new day off for students and families. It maintains the same number of professional learning days for our teachers, but redistributes them to occur earlier in the year. The PL offered in August and September would be done so at the division level, and October and February would be professional learning that is school-based. So in this proposal, staff gain a full clerical day now on November 4th, and it would be flexible in nature given the election, so staff could work on-site or off. By making this change, we're able to meet both of the concerns raised by staff throughout the process. And though this proposal solves for it in slightly different ways, it creates less disruption to an existing calendar than the one that you all previously approved. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
All right, thank you so much. Colleagues, do we want to tackle talking about both calendars at the same time? Do we want to talk about one and then the other? All right, let's, if that's okay. All right, let's start with the proposed 26, 27, the order they came in in the presentation. So we'll be looking at that fresh calendar. So who did I start with last time? Mr. Irving, I will begin with you.
Thank you for the presentation. I am glad to see the support of the staggered start. I'm a proponent of it myself. As a teacher, I've done it for the past couple years, and I think it's great. You know, if you have students, you'd have students anyway, and if you don't have students, you're probably helping out or you're getting prepared for the school year. So it's not a really big change as a teacher. I think from the student perspective, it's nice to be able to come to a new building and figure out the lay of the land without everybody else being there. My only question is about the elementary students grades 1 through 5 attending at the same time as the pre-K and kindergarten students. Wouldn't that effectively not be a staggered start for them?
It would not be a staggered start for first through fifth graders. And the reason behind the bifurcation, the discussions that the committee had were in part based on what they learned from Chesterfield and parsing out how the youngest students acclimate in those small groups, while the older students don't need quite the same transitional time. Certainly it's a big transition, but felt that they did not need the same type of transition. They looked at lots of models, and the proposal they came up with is unique for Henrico. It is not exactly what Chesterfield does, nor is it exactly what Hanover does. We talked to both about their staggered starts.
Okay. So what was the exact thing that what exactly are we trying to avoid by doing it this way?
The goal was really to create those smaller groups for our pre-K and kindergarten teachers. Okay. The sense that they shared with us was that was manageable if they had a smaller class. They didn't need all the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade teachers to help them with that, and that they could carry on with their normal days, and that those siblings may come to school as they do now, and that may be a benefit.
That makes perfect sense to me. Why do we think that the steady increase in support for staggered starts is due to education on the topic?
I can't say specifically. Okay. I would imagine that part of it has just been, we've continued to ask and talk about it over the years.
All right, that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Kinsella.
Yes, the staggered start. And it's interesting, I know communication, and this wouldn't happen until fall 2026. So,
yes.
And communication, I am certain, would be robust on whatever we go with.
Absolutely.
And it's our third year, right? You just said families have heard it before. It's our third year, I think I heard you say. Okay. I was going to say, how does it mirror neighboring localities? Because we have employees, right, that live in other localities that work for us. So I want to be considerate of them. And this would be, what you're proposing would be amenable, you believe, based on the focus groups. And of course, there would be more feedback to be received, yes or no?
Yes.
Before the board approves this, right? We won't approve it until May.
Correct. So the 25-26 adjustment is up for your review and approval this evening. But the 26-27 calendar, now that it's been out, will solicit additional feedback on. Absolutely.
Okay. So even though we're discussing it,
we are not approving it today.
We are not approving it. We're going to gather more feedback.
Yes.
Because I just have to say the number of respondents seemed low.
It was slightly lower than
981?
last year. It was slightly under. It was also administered this winter for whatever that may be worth amidst other calendar disruptions.
Yes, we had so many calendar disruptions this year. So the seat time impact. What is the seat time impact for the secondary? With the staggered start?
Yeah, so we've remained largely whole because of the differences, and I can get into the as many weeds as you would like. Under the proposal, students would either have 174 or 173 days in school. We count by hours, not by days.
Okay.
But just as a reference point, our original for this year was 175. So we're right in that same range. We have the hour, because we count by hours, not by days.
Well, that's important though, right? Hours, not days.
Yes, 180 days. We count by hours. So we are still within the parameters set by the state.
And then given, I mean, I know Mr. Irving, go ahead, Dr. Cashwell.
This was going to add, because I think it's a great question, that still allows banked time. It meets the hours and then still has additional time banked into the calendar.
Well, and then let's roll right into exactly kind of what you're talking about, because we had weather-related time this year and then other time where our buildings were closed due to other issues. We do, under normal circumstances, we have more than the required amount of instructional time in our calendar, though families can't really see, right? You can't see it, right? Like,
Yes.
Okay.
That is absolutely
Because we
correct.
did hear quite a bit.
Yes.
I have to say, between January and February with
Yes.
And we've been fortunate to have extra hours of instruction beyond the requirement easily achieved in prior years where we have not had inclement weather or other school closures. This was an unusual year in that we were struck with both inclement weather closures and, of course, the water closures. But because our calendar goes well beyond the required hours, we were able to initially absorb 5 of those very easily. It was when things continued on that it got a little more challenging, and we were able to make up those hours differently.
Thank you for the clarity as to instructional hours. Transportation, do we feel logistically that we can achieve this with transportation?
Yes, so the idea with the staggered start is that transportation would run their routes as normal and provide that access for every one of our students. That doesn't exist on orientation days that are held over the summer. And so while some of those bus loads may be a little bit lighter, they would run as usual and provide everybody an opportunity to familiarize themselves with those routines as well.
And then Mr. Irving mentioned this briefly. You know, as a staff member, you're working in the building, depending, you know, regardless of whether you have students in your classroom or not. But I know that since we're talking about workload and some folks may be feeling like, well, we would be working with students, a full class, why aren't our colleagues, right? What does that look like? Have we unpacked that? What the support looks like in a building so that everyone is still reporting for work and it's not going to cause dissension with our employees?
Right, so it's still a contractual day regardless of what grade or subject you're teaching. And while we haven't planned out those days in detail, right, it could take many different forms. And as Mr. Irving noted, you may be with students regardless of the grade level you teach, particularly at secondary, right? You may be with students part of the day, assisting with some of those team building activities, other parts of the day, and then preparing for everybody's arrival the next day.
Okay, and then I just have to say I appreciate the elimination of the half day. We do hear a lot about that in regards to childcare. So thank you for that. So many conversations about the week of Thanksgiving that I heard about, and I'm glad, but also to balance it, I also heard if we're going to start mid-August, we want to get out by the end of May. So I'm glad that we're keeping our current model with 2 days at 2 days of school and then the 3 days off for Thanksgiving break. And then the students overwhelmingly, for anyone who wonders why we continue to revisit staggered start, the superintendent student advisory group, and really students anywhere you ask them, continue to say that those transition years, they would have, I mean, they will just unpack all the things. You know, I know we ask our seniors, you know, what would you like to have seen different in your K-12 experience? And overwhelmingly, those transition times. And for those that maybe cannot attend the orientation, right, that staggered start really does give them a smoother transition into a building. So thank you for the presentation. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
Thank you, Ms. Coy, for the presentation. I would like to start by saying I love the staggered start approach. I think it gives our youngest learners and our middle and high schoolers a softer landing. So I definitely appreciate that. It reduces first day anxieties as well for those 6th graders and 9th graders entering into new buildings. I don't have anything else to add to it that Ms. Kinsella and Mr. Irvin hasn't already sort of went over, but I will piggyback on as many half days as we can get rid of, the better, especially for my district, because I'm hearing a lot of absenteeism happens on those half days. So just keep that in mind, colleagues, as we approach calendars going forward. But outside of that, Ms. Coy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Atkins?
So thank you and the entire team for the work. I did have a few questions. I wanted to know if Veterans Day was discussed.
Not by our calendar committee this year in any specific way, no. I mean, we look at the totality of the holidays, but I don't think they considered a specific proposal to provide that as a student and or staff holiday in a specific way.
Okay, so I just wanted to share, that's something that I do get questions about regarding acknowledging Veterans Day. Then the other area of discussion, I also support the staggered start. And I had questions around the PL, which oftentimes I hear that educators want more PL. And seeing how in the responses that educators wanted it moved sooner, I want to learn more context around that. Why do folks want it sooner in the year or earlier in the year? And this is like a three-parter, so you might want a pencil or a pen. But I'm curious around productivity and flexibility. And so I'm hearing wanting it earlier. I want to know why having it earlier. Is it to have a better jump start on particular topics? How are the topics selected, and how are we assessing the topics themselves as far as the timing of them? So are these trainings aligned in a way that it's relevant in a period of time? Is that one of the reasons why it's moved up earlier?
Yes, absolutely. I think some of the feedback we heard was the topics are good topics. The content is good, but we need it sooner. And one of the examples this year was related to benchmark. And so we heard teachers asking for more professional learning around benchmark. And we could do some of that outside of school hours, but the day we had designated was later in the fall, and could leverage that to the best of our abilities. But that was when the day had been designated and schools and staff had planned for. So that's one example. The request really was focused on the impact the professional learning would have on instruction and on students would be greater if that happened earlier in the year and was relevant to instruction happening throughout the entire course of the year. In the calendar that you all adopted last year, you did designate which two would be division level days, so the PL would be coordinated by central office teams, and then which 2 days would be building led, but certainly with the support of central office. And so the topics are chosen kind of collaboratively with those different teams on point to lead the professional learning, whether it's in their buildings or elsewhere.
Can you share with me how educators give input on the professional training that they desire in the building?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different mechanisms, and I'll invite others to chime in here as well. Certainly, with new, there are some things we know are coming down the pike, perhaps a change in math standards, knowing that may be challenging for a particular school or grade level. Others kind of pop up during the year as teachers experience, oh wait, we got training on benchmark, but maybe we want more, we want something supplemental. So I think there are a number of different ways in which those topics are identified and then surfaced to school leaders, to school administrators, to central office teams for support.
I wonder if there's a way to identify trends, because if we understand the uniqueness of one school and then we learn that another school is desiring the same topic, how are we identifying trends? And maybe there's a collective, smarter, strategic way to identify the topics and implement them as well.
I see lots of eagerness jumping up, Leslie, because that does happen. And in fact, a lot of times our schools will partner or pair up because they have the same interest or topic, or they want to bring in a speaker on a particular topic and they may cluster. So, I mean, I think, the PL is a big umbrella for a lot of things that happen. So certainly at the division level, I know, and Dr. Hughes can speak more to this, we're certainly pushing down anything that's required. So for example, there are training requirements that have to happen. Then there's professional learning around, maybe there are new standards of learning for your content area. We know all of our elementary educators were receiving training that was required ahead of the year and even during the year for new benchmark material, which is the language arts curriculum we adopted to become compliant with VLA. Then there are things specific to the school and whatever perhaps their school improvement plan or the work they're doing as a school or team, there are processes put in place to help that work align with what the schools may need. And then teachers are making individual choices for PL through our HCPSU. They may be choosing topics that are simply based on their interest to fulfill those other requirements. And we see the career ladder as a big example of that, where there's menu. They could take individual courses. They may choose to have those lead towards a micro-credential specialization, or they may take standalone courses that just are interested to them, and they have a catalog of choices. They may want to hone in more on classroom management or whatever it might be. So there's kind of 3 buckets of PL that go on, but the division, the school, and the individual, and a good deal of collaboration and data collection that drives each of those so that, you know, as a system, we're offering the right kinds of things that are based on interest.
It would be interesting to discover at the building level training what the top 5 are, especially across high schools, and understanding what trends. So as education changes, so does the trend in what you want to learn. I was also with Mrs. Shea at the Freeman Mavericks capstone project. There it is. And it was very intriguing because in that particular discussion, they talked about age and the similarities and differences between perhaps a seasoned teacher and a younger teacher and the way in which the same curriculum is taught. And I'm curious if there are any trends in that space between high schools on what educators desire, and if there's something that, as a board, we could better understand so that when we see changes, that we want PL sooner so that it's aligned with what educators want to learn. If we knew what those top ones were, and I'm specifically thinking about high schools, maybe we could also assist with flexibility in learning it. Maybe not so much moving the date, but maybe there's some opportunities to assist with flexibility in how they learn it. So just a thought.
Absolutely, and we can certainly share more outside of this presentation related to the PL interests and desires and some of the trends that the PL team has collected both at the site and division level. But certainly, alongside that, know that educators were pretty loud and clear about how they wanted those days, regardless of the content, positioned in the calendar. So we really appreciate your consideration of that request.
Thank you so much. I think one theme I hear in this calendar development is responsive. It's been responsive to things that staff have asked for. It's responsive to things students have asked for, and engaging the parents as well to try to be responsive to that in this iterative process. While that's also kind of been a theme this spring, right? It takes longer to do things in an iterative process, but we get so much more feedback. And so thank you for taking the time to do that. A couple things I do want to dig into, a couple specifics here. I echo with my colleagues that half days are really hard. I understand that through this iterative process, there's obviously a reason that they were included. So I'm not trying to single-handedly usurp all of that input, but half days are really hard. And specifically when I look at the calendar for 26-27, there is a half day on Wednesday, October 28th. That aligns with the last day of Q1. I would, perhaps it could be considered to move that to Friday, October 30th, if that's still within the window in which teachers could do their paperwork to submit grades. That takes some of the hardship of a half day from being on a Wednesday, moving it to a Friday. It also groups it with that longer weekend that goes into November 2nd and 3rd, which I've heard really positive feedback from both staff and families about when we group those days together as we can, how it's almost like a mini break. And it's really a time of rejuvenation. And particularly looking at October 21st is also a student holiday because it aligns with a high holiday. And so just looking at in terms of the amount of disruption for families to have Wednesday the 21st off and then Wednesday the 28th a half day and then a long weekend, if we could move that to Friday and still have the clerical impact that we need, I think it could provide a lot more continuity for families. Sorry, that was a lot, but.
Yeah. And I'll just share the rationale. So in calendars where we had 4 half-days, we tried to, in the last few years, balance 2 on Wednesdays, 2 on Fridays, because the absenteeism is higher on Fridays when it's a half-day. So that had been the balance we had found previously. Now with only 3, we'll have to find new balance if that's the will of the board, but can certainly look at those quarter numbers and see how that would flow through the rest of the calendar.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Again, particularly when we look at the week that comes before it and the week after it, it's a bit, seems discombobulating for both families and for instruction. So thank you. And then really love moving that half day to a full day on the 25th. Again, giving more time where it's needed, responsive to feedback, but also getting rid of a half day. I will be honest, when staggered start first came up, I was going to be a tough sell. But as we've brought it up, the increase in support is compelling. We see it from our families, we see it from our students, we see it from our teachers. So that is certainly compelling. Top of mind challenges with it that come to mind, like Ms. Kinsella brought up, the seat time hours, particularly for secondary. But I'm going to believe you when you say we're still okay. And it really looks like it's at most 1 day impacted. So I just want to be clear, because staggered can sound like a lot of things, like you said, but we're really looking at most for families, 1 day impacted.
Correct.
Okay. And then I think this doesn't need to be solved now, but also thought will need to be put forth for, in secondary, we have a lot of classes that aren't just a single grade, right? They're not just 9th graders, or they're not just 6th graders, or, so what does that look like so that it is engaging for students, but also other students not missing things? Again, it's 1 day, but it is setting the tone for the school year.
Yes.
So putting some thought into that. Something else perhaps we can consider, we haven't needed this in a handful of years, but it would have been helpful this year, is noting on our calendar later in the year what could perhaps be inclement weather days, right? I don't want to have to utilize that, but we saw obviously this year a challenge, and perhaps could that pivot be easier for staff and families if it was listed as, you have this day, we're planning to have it as a holiday. However, it could be a possible inclement weather day if needed. So just a consideration as we continue to think about and look at this calendar. Any other thoughts about the 26-27 calendar? Ms. Kinsella?
How would we consider, the transition years, not just the transition years for students, but newcomers? Could newcomers also be included in the staggered start?
It's something that the committee talked a lot about as well. Yes, if there were students who were new to the school who wanted to participate, making that available to them, recognizing the bulk of the kind of team building activities would be for grade levels, but should the schools have the supports for those students to come, again, walk their schedules, familiarize themselves with the building and some of the teachers, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then outside of that, really just the overwhelming support for, I'm so glad to see, and we're going to get to next year's calendar, just the adjustments, but the responsiveness to the professional learning, because I heard that everywhere, from the classroom to the principal, right? Everyone this year specifically said, we need PL earlier to address whatever it is, right? Whether it's a division-based PL or a school-based PL. And I like the fact that it's still on the calendar, which we asked for, that it's public facing. You know, I think Dr. Cashwell said, well, normally we don't put certain details on the public facing calendar, but I appreciate that no matter where employees go, you know, to find out what does that time look like, you know, whether it's a clerical day or an in-building day, right? Well in advance. So I just want to thank you for that. Thank you for the redirect.
So I just wanted to provide context around the hour concern. So for those who may not be aware, Chesterfield County, their secondary school day is 30 minutes shorter than our day. And they have, I mean, in my personal role as a teacher, we're having to add 2 days, but they were still able to miss a substantial amount of time before that was even considered. And that was with a 30-minute shorter school day. So I think, I wouldn't let that be a concern for moving forward in terms of the hour front. And then in terms of the staggered start, I know that, like, from my personal experience, one thing that we've done that was super helpful for students is the students go to all of their classes that they would have, so all 7 sections. So you get to see every single teacher, you get to know where your room is, and then each section was about 15 minutes except for a homeroom period, which is longer, and they meet with a program that we have called Surf Mentors, and I'm sure our schools have similar programs as well, where it's older students who come and volunteer their time to interact with them and do some fun team building activities. Each class that you go to has a different topic and a presentation that covers school expectations, and then they also go to a expectations assembly with the administrators, which is longer in nature. They go to lunch, and that kind of fills up the day. So for most teachers, you're maybe seeing a kid for 15 minutes, or you could potentially have a helper. So there's ways you can do it, but I found that as a teacher to be very useful for them, and I think it's something that they've enjoyed and found value in.
Thank you so much. All right, colleagues, let's pivot to the 25-26 calendar, to which we're being asked to perhaps to vote on this evening if we'll make it adjustments. So Ms. Coy, you gave us a lot of great information as to the reason that this is being looked at, responsiveness, and this chart breaks down really, to me, it breaks down a lot of things, a lot about what it looks like for staff with change. So I just want to boil down to, because that was a lot of the reason that the change is being made.
Yes.
But I want to boil down for our families, what the change looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, is that September 22nd would be a student holiday. And that is the only change that families would see.
That's correct.
Correct? Okay, I just wanted to be clear with that. All right, on that note, colleagues, questions, comments, concerns about this?
I think I'll just say it's responsive based on the surveys that were sent to our employees. And just to what we just said about the 26-27 calendar, right, being so responsive as to families with staggered start or staff with the learning occurring earlier in the year. I love this. I absolutely love this, and I love that it's public facing. That November 4th will now be, I think it's November 4th, right? A clerical day, right? So it's out there. That you would likely not need childcare that day, right? Because it's not in building.
Staff.
Right, for staff, right,
Yes.
for staff.
Right.
Right, clerical
Because it
day
would
for
be-
staff would be likely maybe a virtual option.
So what we proposed here is a flexible day, yes, so it could be on-site or off, What we proposed was a flexible clerical day in this scenario, so it could be on-site or off-site because of the nature of elections in our building, recognizing some staff may want to be there and other staff or particularly high-traffic buildings may prefer to be off-site.
So would staff then have the option, or is that principal
It's
option?
an employee option. It
It's
provides the employee the
employee
flexibility
option.
on that day,
Okay.
yes.
But the employee has the flexibility. That's what I was
Correct.
going for. Thank you so much.
All right, other questions, comments? I will say I do appreciate if we're going to add a day, to add it on a Monday, looking at the rest of the calendar, there are other Mondays off. We'll just say what it is. There are quite a few other Mondays off for things like Labor Day that we have to, and some other things as well. But hopefully by putting that as well as on a Monday, that it creates a little bit of a rhythm there, as opposed to, another day off. But again, change is being responsive to our staff feedback and what they have said that they need, as well as for families, the only change would be September 22nd. Correct. Sums it up. All right, any other questions, comments, concerns? Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, appreciate the calendar discussion, and again, would not be seeking your approval on the proposed 26-27 calendar until our May meeting. All right, for the next batch of items, these are policy related, and 6.02 through 6.16 are a batch of policies related to contracts and compensation. And of course, as you know, the board initiated in their October 2024 request a review of policies on this topic, being responsive to employee feedback. And so in board docs, there is a summary of all of the proposed actions for reference, and would be happy to take any questions. Again, there's some consolidation, retirement, and clarification of language responsive to employees.
All right, colleagues, there's a big chunk. Would you like to take them as a whole chunk? Would you like to take them as smaller chunks? Great, let's just go with.
Any questions related to any of them?
Related to any of them.
We'll be happy to take.
I have one, if that's okay. Looking at actually the first one, I believe, P4-02-001. In the language of this, it uses Board of Education and it uses school board. I'm to assume that when it says the Board of Education, it's referring to the Virginia Board of Education and school board as our as our school board. In some of the subsequent policies, it's a little more specific there, and it says the Virginia Board of Education. I think that could provide clarity to those in the community reading the policy that may not, at first glance, know the difference.
We can certainly take a look and provide clarity throughout.
Thank you.
Chair Shea, I did have one question. It is item 6.13, review of proposed revisions to policy P4-05-012. In the policy, there's a section that states, let me get to it. HCPS will compensate secondary teachers for covering classes, including study halls, when that coverage infringes on their daily planning time. Has there been any discussion around compensation for elementary teachers as well? I didn't see anything in the language for compensation for elementary
It's
teachers.
structured this way specifically due to the unique nature of the secondary day. So, for example, you may have a period at secondary where you're not teaching a class and it's your planning time, and there may be a situation where a class needs coverage and you would agree to be compensated to provide that coverage because you're missing your required planning time. That's why there's a compensation. Elementary teachers are generally teaching a class, throughout the day, and they have their assigned planning time. And so substitute coverage looks different at the elementary level versus by block or class. So typically they're not covering in that way at the elementary level. It's unique to the secondary schedule where you'd be able to leave a block where you didn't have students and cover a block where someone was needed, versus elementary substitutes are taken for the day or, throughout the day.
The reason I'm asking specifically for policy related, so here it says all elementary school teachers shall be provided at least an average of 30 minutes per day during the school week as planning time. However, if you have an elementary teacher that is not able to use that 30 minutes of planning time to cover the cafeteria, am I reading this correct that they would not be compensated for the 30
They
minutes?
shouldn't be asked to cover the cafeteria. They are due their required planning time, and so our secondary. This is speaking to the required planning time that we want our teachers to have, both at the elementary and secondary level. Because we have offered the option for secondary teachers, due to the unique nature of the schedule, to give up their planning time, we compensate them for that.
So just for point of clarity, if there is an elementary teacher who should be using their planning time but have been or received the request to do another activity during their planning time, that is a building level discussion, correct?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure for clarity from a policy perspective.
I have a question on this one as well. So it says that elementary school teachers shall be provided at least an average of 30 minutes per day. I thought we were shooting for 45 minutes. Is that a change, or am I misremembering where the 45 minutes came from?
This is probably grounded in the state requirement. We actually offer more than this at all of our elementary schools, and thanks to the board's additional staff, the budgetary change that was made, we were able to create more planning time for elementary teachers and going beyond this, but this would be a minimum as is required.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Are we allowed to continue on the other ones, or do we want to stick on this?
Let's see if we have any more on this one. It's, it can be meaty, and then we'll go to the next one. Anybody else have one on this planning time for teachers? All right, hearing none, Mr. Irving, pick your next.
Yes, the next one is, what is this? Oh, this is the, sorry, I'm trying to give you a number. 6.10. Time schedule. So it says okay. I don't have my question anymore. I answered it myself. Okay, the other one then, I will switch unless anybody had any comments about the time schedule. Okay. The next one was staff meetings, which is 6.12. So this one says in here, principals shall ensure that staff meetings are consistent with the annual contract hours of instructional personnel and schedules of all applicable staff. Can we define what that means? So if we're saying that a contractual day ends at such time, very often, having been a teacher-faculty meetings can extend past that time. Is that saying that they should not do that?
So, right, they want to be mindful of not going beyond the time that's accounted for within the teacher contract for things such as staff meetings, which are accounted for in the teacher contract. But there is a limit to that, and this is acknowledging that in policy.
Will we put out information saying it's you should not exceed this amount of time for a given meeting?
We have provided guidance to our administrators, and I would note that one of the, while not up for approval by the board, the contract amendment that is simultaneously being worked on, this speaks to that and is also spelled out similarly in the contract, the amendment that will go with the teacher contract based on employee feedback to provide more information and specificity. While this is not a change, it's simply adding clarifying language to again ensure that we are mindful of that. There's intentionality around that, and it also spells out the number of hours within the contract that are to account for staff meetings, et cetera, individual extracurricular, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I appreciate on this one how other related school events beyond the instructional day is very explicitly laid out what those could include. I think that that transparency for staff is important.
Can I? And just to piggyback, Dr. Cashwell, for clarity, there is time in the contract beyond the instructional contract day for staff meetings.
Yes, and one of the things at the request of staff was to be more clear about exactly how and what that looks like. And so you'll see as we finalize the contract amendment, it will spell that out in more detail. As I shared, we worked with TAC and other groups on really laying that out, and that was something they were very favorable with their feedback on having that included there. Again, it's more specificity. It's not making a change to it. It's just simply being more clear and spelling it out.
No, I'm just appreciative. I mean, the having served on the policy committee, so with Mrs. Shea, so we've been working on these for quite some time, and then in response to our initiative in 2024, right? And changes have to take place first before the contract addendum changes can take place. I mean, Dr. Cashwell or Mrs. Coy, can you just please list all of the feedback, like the places we've gotten feedback? I know you just mentioned Teacher Advisory Committee. We've had the Policy Committee. We've had Principal Advisory Committee. We've had, can you just please give some detail? And also, we read written public comment, listen to public comment, and read emails and consider that
May
feedback.
have covered them all.
I mean,
Well
right?
done.
I'm at the grocery store. I'm hearing feedback. I mean, we are receiving feedback at all times, right? So that's really what the clarity and specificity that we're adding is, right? Have I missed any of the groups?
The only one I can think of is we did create an internal work group with principals this year to look at these issues specifically, an informal work group that's gotten together and will continue to do so. But I think you've listed just about everything else.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to let my colleagues know, in case they didn't, how many places it's gone that Mrs. Shea and I've had the privilege of hearing right in policy committee before it even got to policy committee. That's all I had, Chair Shea.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, Ms. Kinsella. And, again, just to reiterate what you said, even more clearly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Coy and Dr. Cashwell, but a lot of this work, while we're continuously doing policy work to make things clearer on our many, many chapters of policy, a lot of this work is directly responsive to the feedback from the fall survey that we used as a starting point, which asks for clarity, specificity, and to codify a lot of the provisions that we've made over the last couple years. It's taken that iterative process we talked about earlier, going through a lot of review groups, then going back through the same review groups to see because we want it to truly be responsive to the needs of our staff and reflective of what, as Henrico Public Schools, we're providing for our staff. And so this has been a lengthy process. It continues. We're not taking action on these, I think, until May 8th. And so they're still open for review. We welcome continued feedback on them as well. But a lot here, but a lot of clarity here. Any other of these reviews or retirements, colleagues, that you would like to specifically dig into today?
I do have one question, Chair Shea. Back to the staff meeting. Is there any sort of notice that principals are required to give staff before having a meeting?
I think typically they do provide a published schedule of when they would be held. However, I would imagine there might be an emergency scenario on which they may want to call one. Something would occur during the day to debrief with staff. But, most importantly, the guidance, I know Dr. Grant and her team work with principals to help them understand the importance of managing time well and being mindful of teacher contract time and not exceeding that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other.
All right, team, thank you so much.